And the Quran, there's only one Quran. There are no various versions or whatnot. It's one standard copy of the Quran.
Variant number 1. Quran chapter 2 verse 140. Notice here the Warsh Quran says يَقُولُونَ, they say. But in the Hafs it's تَقُولُونَ, you say. In the Warsh Quran the variant is a third person masculine plural imperfect verb. But in the Hafs Quran it's a second person masculine plural imperfect verb. Notice also these two words begin with different letters. The letter Ya in the Warsh Quran, يَقُولُونَ, and the letter Ta in the Hafs, تَقُولُونَ. So this is an example of an actual consonantal difference that changes the meaning of the word.
Across the Muslim world, and really there's not been any variant versions of the Quran. The Quran is the Quran for all sects and schisms and groups of Islam. And we also, all Muslims take pride in the fact there is but one Quran. There's no variants of it.
Variant number 2. Quran chapter 2 verse 58 says, remember when we said, go into this town and eat from it wherever you like, freely. Enter the gate prostrating and say, relieve us of our burdens. Your sins will be forgiven. We will grant increase to all good doers. Now let's look at the Arabic. Notice here the Warsh Quran says, yughfar, will be forgiven. But in the Hafs it's naghfir, we will forgive. In the Warsh Quran the variant is a third person masculine singular passive imperfect verb. But in the Hafs Quran, it's a first-person plural imperfect verb. Notice also, these two words begin with different letters. The letter Ya in the Warsh, yughfar, and the letter Noun in the Hafs Quran, naghfir. Actual consonantal difference that changes the meaning of the word.
In North Africa, there is a slightly different text that is based on a slightly different reading, mostly corresponding to what we read in the rest of the world, but with some slight variations that do not affect anything that Muslims believe and do not have any major impact on any Muslim practices.
Variant number 3. Quran chapter 2 verse 184 says, now let's look at the Arabic. Notice here the Warsh Quran says, طعامي مساكين, feeding poor men. But in the Hafs it's طعام مسكين, feeding a poor man. In the Warsh Quran, the variant, masakin, is a masculine plural noun. But in the Hafs Quran, the variant, miskin, is a masculine singular noun. In addition, here we have a serious conflict in Islamic law, because these are two different Islamic legal rulings. This verse prescribes that Muslims who miss days of fasting must compensate for that. But the problem is, the specific compensation of giving food is not the same in these two different Arabic Qur'ans. So my question is, which Islamic legal ruling is correct? Is it feeding a number of poor men, plural, as in the Warsh Quran, or feeding one poor man, singular, as in the Hafs Quran?
Pre-Uthmanic, and that could be at variance with the Uthmanic. And once Uthman has this publicized, then Muslims naturally fell in place and copied that because they knew that this was an official document, not done by one person, but done under the aegis of the caliph, with a whole apparatus and the wherewithal to make sure that we are publishing a document that accurately represents the preaching of our prophet.
Variant number 4. Quran chapter 3 verse 81 says, remember when Allah made a covenant with the prophets. Now that we have given you a share of the book and wisdom, and then a messenger comes to you confirming what is with you, you must believe in him and help him. He asked, do you agree and undertake my commission on that condition? They replied, we agree. He said, bear witness then, I am with you as one of the witnesses. Now let's look at the Arabic. Notice here the Warsh Quran says, ataynakum, we have given you. But in the Hafs it's ataytukum, I have given you. In the Warsh Quran the variant is a first person plural perfect verb, but in the Hafs Quran it's a first person singular perfect verb. So this is another example of a consonantal difference that changes the meaning of the word. We see the letter Noun in the Warsh Quran, atayna, and the letter Ta in the Hafs Quran, ataytu.
What else is there? Like, did something else get suppressed that we would like to know about? Mm-hmm. Well, here, this comes, as a double-edged sword. On the one hand, this cuts away at the sense of complacency that many Muslims have gone around with, thinking that, okay, everything has been preserved dot for dot, letter for letter, the way it was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, with no variation or change whatsoever. So, that it cuts at that general sense, which actually is not a scholarly way of thinking about the Quran. Our scholars have always known and have always described in our classical books variations and manuscripts, like, it's read like this by Ubay bin Ka'b, it's read like this by Ibn Masud, and so on. And in the Codex of Ibn Masud, it was seen to be written like this. In the Codex of Ubay bin Ka'b, it was seen to be written like this with this or that variation. So these were always known in scholarly circles to have existed. But recently, average Muslims have just simply, without bothering to learn, they have just simply parroted a common way of speaking about the Quran and saying, it's 100% the way it's always been, and they cannot imagine any variation. So in the one way, it cuts against that, but on the other hand, it removes that scholarly suspicion which was there. Like in academia, there was always a suspicion. We would really like to find a pre-Uthmanic Quran. We would like to see what was there before Uthman suppressed it all and gave us the one copy which everybody has been running around with now.
And when we say the various different ways to recite the Quran, we are not talking about different voices or different styles. We're talking about slight differences in pronunciations, slight differences in letters, slight differences in harakat. In other words, if you were to compare two printed Qurans, you're going to see differences between them. Especially those who have been exposed to some of our brothers who live in Algeria or Morocco or other North African countries, they recite the Quran in a slightly different way. Not just a voice or not just a speaking style, but also changes in letters and words and harakat. And these variances are memorized in specialized institutions known as the schools of the Qira'at. In other words, if you were to compare two printed Qurans, you're going to see differences between them. Changes in letters and words and harakat.